Welcome back, everybody. I hope the lunch was good. Okay, so Cory Doctorow is here. There's no real need to introduce him. He's a former EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation activist. He resigned, he quit a few weeks ago to become an independent, full-time independent writer. He's won many awards with his novels. And he's also one of the best specialists of DRM. So he's going to talk about digital rights management. So please welcome Cory Doctorow.
Thanks. Hi, folks. It's nice of you all to turn up. If this talk has a title, it's something like Technology Giveth and Technology Taketh Away. I don't know if you know it, we're actually in a building that's next to Edifice Ompi, the WIPO building, where there's a very large group of well-moneyed people just up the road here who have failed to understand that technology giveth and technology taketh away, although I spent a couple of years there trying to help them understand that. Here's an example of how technology giveth and technology taketh away. Oh yeah, so let me say before I go any further, I talk fast, and if I'm talking too fast, do this, because a lot of you aren't native English speakers. Thank you. And I'll talk into the mic. I was warned not to talk too close to the mic, but how's this? Yeah, great. So, when Marconi invented the radio, he displaced the incomes of a lot of people who are engaged in live performance. They call the live performance circuit vaudeville, and they called them vaudevillians. And the initial response of vaudevillians is that this is .com nonsense. There's no business model in a radio. We know what the business model is for music. You have a door, and you have a giant man at the door with a lot of tattoos, and if you try to come through the door without buying a ticket, he'll punch you in the head and throw you out the door. And that seemed like a pretty good business model, and they couldn't figure out how to transmit the giant man with the tattoos along with the radio signal, and therefore they couldn't figure out how to make any money off of it. And Marconi had this crazy .com notion. There are all these different .com notions floating around then. But there was one really insane .com notion, and it was this. Let's go and find actors, out-of-work actors with good, deep voices, and have them say nice things about soap. And then what we'll do is we'll invent new forms of statistical mathematics that we can use to figure out how many people listen to radio shows. Then we'll go to the American Congress, and we'll ask them for an antitrust exemption that will allow us to do blanket licensing for music so radio stations can play music. And when it's all done, we're going to use the money from the soap people to give it to the collecting societies to apportion based on the new math, and that's going to make artists wealthy. And artists said, well, that's ridiculous, right? It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's like selling pet food with sock puppets on the internet. The interesting thing is that even after that business model had been proven out to some extent, there were still a lot of artists who didn't like it very much. The argument against the radio business model goes something like this. I'm a charismatic. I stand on a stage and I do a performance. That's a thing as old and holy as the first story told in front of the first fire in the first cave. You have no right to tell me that I am to be a mere clerk who sits in a back room producing commodity work that you then present to my audience on my behalf. Now those people, by and large, who felt that way, they ended up getting outcompeted by the technology. They ended up spending their lives flipping burgers or driving taxis and not being musicians anymore. But musicians who did want to go into the studio became very wealthy. And now, 70 or 80 years later, we've reached a period where it's very hard to control how a recording moves around on the network after it's been made. But a lot of people have observed that you can exploit the fact that recordings spread very fast and very cheaply around on the internet to bring more people in to a live performance. And of course, live performances have a reliable business model, the man with the tattoos at the door. Now, the musicians who are the descendants of the people who jumped right, who jumped in the correct direction in Marconi's era, find themselves making an equally ridiculous argument as compared to the argument that was made by the musicians who didn't make the jump. And their argument goes something like this. Who are you to tell me that I am to be a trained monkey who capers on stage? I'm no charismatic. I'm an artist. I commune with my muse in a closed room, and when I'm done, I open the door, and not 1 second before. You have no right to tell me that simply because I lack charisma, that my virtuosity shouldn't be enough to carry me into the music industry. But the fact is that technology giveth and technology taketh away. And until WIPO started writing treaties out there, no one ever said that you should be able to sell recordings until the heat death of the universe. So today, we're on a quest for the internet business model. And there are a lot of signs and signals that point to what is and what isn't a good internet business model. I'd like to run down for you some examples of what isn't an internet business model. If your business model involves criminalizing the majority of internet users, it's not an internet business model. So today, the music industry has embarked on a program to sue enough of its customers that the rest of them return to the mall. I don't know how many customers you need to sue before the rest of them return to the mall, but it seems to be a very large number, because once all of these customers are required to be the subject of individual lawsuits, right now they're put into these collective lawsuits, these John Doe lawsuits, where they go and they bring suit against 50 or 100 people in one go. These 100 people have never met each other. They don't know that they exist. They've never communicated. They're in no sense a class of defendants together, and it's only a matter of time until each one of these will be the subject of a separate John Doe lawsuit. When that happens, 1 in 50 lawsuits in the American federal docket will be the music industry suing a fan. Right? That's not a business model. That's a denial of service attack on the American judicial system. Another sign that your internet business model isn't ready for the internet. If you have to suppress science, it's not an internet business model. So Ed Felton is a hero. He's a Princeton engineering professor. He and a team of engineers from his school put together a report that showed how the signal processing maths in something called the Secure Digital Watermarking Initiative were flawed, and proposed to give a talk on this at a learned conference on engineering. Now, it is illegal under laws promulgated over there to tell people how to take copy restriction wrappers off of copyrighted works. And because knowing about the flaws in the Secure Digital Watermarking Initiative would give you the clues that you needed to take a copy restriction wrapper off of the work, the music industry was able to threaten Ed with a lawsuit. And not just threaten Ed, but threaten the conference at which he was to give his talk. Now, EFF, my former employer, Electronic Frontier Foundation, a charitable organization supported by members like you, brought suit on Ed's behalf, and as the music industry often does when someone stands up to their bullying, they turned around and they ran away. But not long after, a Russian researcher named Dmitry Skilyarov turned up in America, and gave a talk on the cryptographic mistakes in Adobe's ebook restriction technology. And when his talk was done, the FBI arrested him. Eventually, there was a long lawsuit, and he went back home to Russia, and the Russian equivalent of the Home Office or State Department issued a warning to Russian scientists saying, stay away from America. It's turned into the kind of country where talking about the wrong kind of maths will get you thrown in jail. Now, this is the home of Lysenkoism. Right? This is the home of official state science, of ideologically correct wheat. This is a subject my friend Bruce here is very good at going on about. Ideologically correct wheat. And they said the wheat will grow because the 5-year plan said it will. And if anyone wants to talk about the science, well, we'll put you in a gulag. That nation found America had dropped below its standards for academic freedom. That's a good sign that you don't have an internet-ready business model. If your business model ensures that features in an otherwise fast-moving technology marketplace stagnate, it's not an internet-ready business model. Now imagine 10 years ago, at the dawn of the DVD, you walked down to a Virgin Megastore with 2,000 euros in your pocket. You spent 1,000 of them on CDs and 1,000 on DVDs. You put them in the bank. You put them in your living room. 10 years later, you take them out of the bank and you see how your investment has accumulated value. Well, if your investment was in CDs, it's accumulated quite a lot of value, because when you bought the CDs, all you got was a thing that you could listen to. But 10 years later, you can turn it into ringtones, karaoke, mashups. You can load it onto an iPod. You can rip it and burn it to MP3 CDs that hold 10 times as much music. You can back it up. You can stream it. You can give it to a friend. You can loan it out. You can do all the stuff that you never could do when you bought the stuff. That's a dividend on a wise investment in media. Now compare that with DVDs. Pretty much the same discs. They're made in the same factories. These days we read them with the same lasers. But in 10 years, not one substantial new feature has been added to the DVD. If you have a mobile phone that plays video, you can't take the video from your DVD and put it on your mobile phone. You need to go and buy a mobile phone version of that video. If you have an iPod that plays video, you can take your shiny discs that play music and take the music and put them on your iPod. But you can't take the shiny discs that play video and put them on your iPod. And that's because when you add copy restriction, because it's illegal to take the copy restriction off, and because you need to take the copy restriction off to play it, the only people who can make players are people who you give your permission to. The guy who invented an American version of this, the broadcast flag, which is to apply this kind of copy restriction to television, the president of FreeStudios, a guy named Andy Sidos, he described this to me once as a well-mannered marketplace where no one could disrupt his business without first consulting with him. Now, I live in a nice liberal democracy. I'm not a frothing at the chops libertarian who doesn't believe in any state intervention in the marketplace, but I know a planned economy when I see it. Right? I know crony capitalism when I see it, and that's it. Here's another example of how you know that your business model isn't internet ready. If after you embark on your business model, you end up having to spend millions of dollars in damages to people whose computers you damaged, it's not an internet ready business model. So Sony BMG shipped 52 titles, 8 million copies, of CDs, music CDs, infected with 2 different pieces of malicious software. One was a piece of spyware called MediaMax from Suncom, and one was a rootkit from First for Internet called XCP. And again, Ed Felton did some of the really groundbreaking work uncovering what this does, along with his researcher, Alex Halderman. These had a lot of negative effects on computers. They destabilized them. They exposed them to a lot of security vulnerabilities. The rootkit in particular, there were worms, internet worms that were parasitic on the rootkit. They were kind of opportunistic infections. Once you'd weakened your computer's immune system by foolishly playing music on it, you ended up in a world where other parasites that were less hardy could come in and infect your computer and so on. Now, they've settled a class action suit in New York, but there's still class action suits pending in Florida and in Texas. There's also state attorneys general bringing class action suits, bringing state actions against them. There's a consumer lawsuit in Italy. There's a government lawsuit in Ireland. There's 2 consumer and 1 government lawsuits in Canada. And the US government still hasn't figured out whether or not they're going to charge them under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for infecting an estimated tens of thousands of military and government networks with this security eroding technology. That's a good sign that your business model isn't internet ready. Digital rights management technology is at the core of internet, not ready for internet business models. A digital rights management technology is a technology that restricts how people who buy media can use it. It doesn't restrict how people who acquire media illegitimately or without authorization can use it. If you download music from Kazaa, it doesn't have digital rights management on it. It's just the people who are foolish enough to part with their money and be good customers that digital rights management punishes. If you buy some digital rights management, music or movies, or if you have a digitally rights managed email or Word document or PDF, the effect of the digital rights management is to give control over your computer to someone else while you're viewing or experiencing that work. And sometimes even when you're not. These rootkits run even when you're not listening to music. Imagine a world where every time I put a record on my record player, the record player's the ownership of that record player was temporarily transferred to the company that made the record. Where designing and issuing a record gave you the right not just to control who could copy that record, but who could design a technology capable of copying that record. That's what digital rights management is in a nutshell. Digital rights management technology has some really serious failings from a social perspective. For 500 years, science as we know it was dominated by a practice called alchemy. And alchemists had one thing in common. They didn't tell anyone else how they did their business. Right? Every alchemist kept his or her findings, mostly his, I think, a secret from other alchemists. So for 500 years, every alchemist discovered for himself that drinking mercury was a bad idea. And as a consequence, alchemy as a science, in large part, stagnated. And then one day, an alchemist did something radical. He published. We have a term for the 500-year period before alchemists started publishing. We call it the Dark Ages. We have a term for the century that followed the beginning of alchemist publishing. We call it the Enlightenment. Now, we have technologies that mirror this. We have open source and free software, which is like proprietary software, but the difference is that with open source and free software, you tell everyone how you did it, and you invite people to improve on it, and tell other people how they did it. And that's what free and open source licenses are. And if you own a Mac, the operating system running on it is built on free and open source software. If you use Firefox, that's free and open source software. If you have ever sent email, chances are the server that you sent it to was built on free and open source software. And chances are most of the websites you visit are built on free and open source software. Right? Free and open source software is a critical piece of a healthy and thriving world. We have science and we have trade secrets. It's not that everyone who does stuff that makes the field progress tells everyone else how they do it. But we don't inhabit a world where entire fields of endeavor are dominated by secrecy. Every field of endeavor has an open component. And the ones that have more open components move faster. So with digital rights management technology, the objective is to build a system that users can't modify. After all, if I give you a CD that isn't meant to be copied, and you can change the software that plays the CD so it allows you to copy it, then the digital rights management technology has been handily defeated. And as a consequence, every digital rights management technology comes with a license agreement that requires you to build the technology in such a way that users can't modify it. There is no open source and free modifiable DRM. There are sort of stuff at the edges, like Sun's Open DRM, which basically uses trusted computing to prevent you from implementing any of the changes that you make. So it gives you the source code. You can change the source code all you want. It just won't run anymore, which is a way of honoring the letter of these licenses while butchering the spirit of them. Digital rights management technology is often posed as a technology that will strike a balance between giving everything away for free and being able to charge money for media. But digital rights management technology can only tip that balance away from charging money for stuff. Because if you sit in your sitting room with your wireless laptop on your lap and your finger over the mouse button, hovering between the iTunes Music Store and Kazaa, both of which will give you the same song at one click of a mouse, the differences between them being that iTunes will charge you 89 pence and then lock you down into a proprietary system, and Kazaa won't, then there's no reason to choose iTunes. No one woke up this morning wishing for a way to do less with their music or movies. There is no business that can be built by putting on the box of the product now with fewer desirable features. So anyone who's ever bought DRM media has done so because they didn't know any better or because they held their nose and bought it anyway. But what DRM has the long-term effect of doing is chasing people away from authorized services and towards the free ones. Because no one ever got a rootkit installed on their computer by listening to Sony music that they downloaded from Kazaa. You only get that if you go to Virgin Megastore and give them your money. So the question is, what does work? What's an internet-ready business model look like? Well, there's a technical answer that I quite like. Digital rights management is one of a class of security technologies, but there are lots of other security technologies. One is called conditional access. This isn't to be confused with the set-top boxes that you have in your sitting room. They're called conditional access systems, but this is a much broader kind of cryptographic sense of the term conditional access. What conditional access means is you don't get access to a work until you meet some condition. So if you want to get access to your email, you have to provide a password. If you want to download a song from the iTunes Music Store, you have to show them a token that says that you've transferred 99 cents into their bank account. So the iTunes Music Store has this conditional access system. It prevents you from downloading songs until you've given them 99 cents. It also has a digital rights management technology. That prevents you from doing things like streaming your music to more than 5 CPUs over a 24-hour period. People do have to go through the conditional access system if they want to get access to the music. But people routinely break the digital rights management technology after it's delivered. Because conditional access is like having a safe in the bank. If you want to get money out of the bank, you go to the bank, you show them that you're authorized to have money out of the safe, and then they give you the safe. Digital rights management is like having the safe in your living room. Right? There is no safe so secure that we put it in the robber's house. Digital rights management, in order to upgrade or fix or patch, requires that you can force everyone who's already got digital rights management technology installed in their living rooms, installed on their laptops, on their phones, to download an update. Right? It requires that you download these updates. Now, first of all, as a technical matter, it's pretty hard to do that. There are lots of devices that never have to connect to the network. But second of all, this is an attractive nuisance. It's an invitation to abuse. Because what we've seen is that whenever you give people the ability to add, to field update a technology, it's often the case that they field update it in a way that ends up restricting your rights and changing the deal that you made when you bought the technology. I have iTunes on my computer that I bought for 99 cents for due consideration. And that consideration included the idea that I could stream them to any number of computers over a 24-hour period. Subsequent to my buying them, Apple issued non-optional updates to iTunes that doesn't allow me to stream these to any number of CPUs over a 24-hour period. That caps it to 5 CPUs. Now, I spent the last couple of years in a digital rights management standards body that meets that way at the ITU, or not the ITU, I beg your pardon, at the European Broadcasters Union, the EBU. And this is the body that's trying to make digital television standards in Europe, Asia, Australia, and Latin America. And one day we were having a conversation about just this very thing, field updating and contracts and the deal that you make when you agree to allow your device to do X or Y or Z. And the guy from the MPAA was arguing for the ability to switch off parts of your home theater depending on which show you were watching. So there'd be certain elements of a home theater system that wouldn't be allowed by the receiver to get access to a certain show, and you'd flag that on a show-by-show basis. And I said, well, but don't you have a bunch of statutory rights to content that you get from broadcast television? And he said, oh yeah, sure you do. But maybe you'd agree to waive some of those rights in consideration for access to some good stuff. I said, okay, well, I can imagine that. I've made all kinds of agreements where I traded a little bit of this for a little bit of that. Tell me how that agreement works. And he said, well, here's how it would work. It's really simple. You're watching channel 3. You pick up the remote. You turn it to channel 4. You made an agreement. Right? You agreed on channel 4 not to watch a show. You got consideration. You got the show. That's a funny kind of agreement. But when you add in these renewability systems, these abilities to field patch and remove features from devices and systems, it becomes an even funnier kind of agreement. It becomes an agreement where no matter how abusive the terms are when you started, they can get more abusive after the fact. TiVo, which makes a set-top box like the Sky Plus that allows you to record television that comes in off the air and off your cable. TiVo recently field updated a number of their devices, again non-optional, with a Macrovision copy restriction system that changes a TiVo from a device that tapes or records anything that's broadcast to a device that records anything that's broadcast that doesn't have a no record flag set in it. Right? There's nothing about this in the law. Right? Recording a show is lawful and recording a show is lawful. It doesn't matter whether there's a no record flag or not a no record flag. It doesn't have any bearing on the law. What this amounts to is a kind of private law that gets enforced against you, regardless of what your arrangement was with the studios, or with the device manufacturer. So it's kind of like you walked into a shop, and as you came up to the till, the shopkeeper leaned across and punched you in the mouth. And you said, well, why did you do that? And he said, well, you agreed. And you said, well, when did I agree? Well, if you checked down the shop down the road, there's a sign under the doormat that says, when you come into my shop, I get to punch you in the mouth. You go, okay, well, from now on, I'm going to check that shop. And then you check down under that other doormat the next day, and you go back into the shop, and you notice that under the doormat, it doesn't say anything about punching you in the mouth anymore, so you figure you're safe. So you walk in, and he punches you in the mouth again. You say, why did you do that? I checked. The agreement says that I didn't let you punch me in the mouth. He said, yeah, well, we've moved the agreement somewhere else today. Right? That's the kind of agreement that these renewability systems make. So conditional access, though, are systems that, once you get access to the content, don't try to control what you do with it any more than the bank tries to control what you do with the money after they take it out of the safe. So with a conditional access system, like the one iTunes has, you can compel people to give you a potentially infinite number of 99-cent transfers or 89 pence transfers. What you can't do is compel them to do stuff that is in line with whatever your crazy idea is about rent seeking this month after they've acquired the work. What you can't do is lock them into a vertical platform. One thing to be aware of in these contexts is something like the Google DRM model. So Google has just shipped DRM on their video. It's quite telling. It is like the Google censorship in China. It is the first time that Google has built a product that is intended to serve someone other than the people who use it. So back in the early days of Google, the advertising industry used to turn up at Google all the time and say, we want graphic banners on our site. We think that they would be really that they'd be really good for us. And Google said, yeah, well, that's fine, but searchers don't like graphic banners. Well, the entertainment industry turned up at Google and they said, we'd like to restrict how people use video. And they didn't say, well, that's fine, but people who buy video don't like to have their usage restricted. So Google has taken this watershed step where they've decided to start building products for other industries, not for their own business interests. The way the Google DRM works is it's kind of a hyperactive conditional access system. Every time you want to watch the video, you have to ask Google if your player is allowed to decode it again. So every time you want to watch a video, you have to be online and willing to tell Google that you're about to watch it. And if Google ever goes down or goes away or merges, or if that server goes down, goodbye video. Right? So conditional access systems are good, but not if you have to phone the conditional access system every time you want to make a use. What else is good? Blanket licenses are awesome. Blanket licenses are systems where rights holders, either voluntarily or under compulsion from the government or through some combination thereof, yield a certain class of uses to a rights society that negotiates on their behalf. And there are good rights societies and bad rights societies. I'm under no illusions that all rights societies are good. Some of them turn up at kindergarten classes and say, we'd like to collect for the songs that the children sing here. But the idea of a rights society isn't per se bad. It's just a way of lowering transaction costs. And then people who want to use the works give the collecting society a blanket fee, and in exchange they get to use all the works they want. This is how a DJ at a radio station can play records without having to have a 400 euro an hour lawyer call another 400 euro an hour lawyer and negotiate whether this needle drop is going to cost 15 cents or 20 cents. Right? You pay a blanket fee and you get access to this stuff. It takes the transaction costs out of the transaction. So we can imagine a conditional access system married to a blanket licensing system. All the music in the world that you want, you have to show that you've paid for your license to it. We don't try to restrict what you do it after you get it. We can perfectly restrict people's access to this celestial jukebox because the conditional access system isn't in your living room, it's on our premises. And it's a way to pay content creators without having to restrict how users make stuff and how users use stuff. The final thing that I think is a characteristic of every good internet-based business model is that it enables conversations and community. If there's one thing the internet's really good at, it's putting people together. Now, in the early days of the internet, there was this conceit that content is king. right? That content is the most valuable thing the internet has. There's easy ways to show that content isn't and never will be king. For starters, you can look at the relative sizes of the industries. Hollywood brings in about $60 billion a year. Telecoms brings in about $6 trillion a year. But an object lesson is probably easier. Imagine I were to send you to a desert island, and I gave you the option of taking your friends or your records. If you chose the records, we'd call you a sociopath. Where we have people who are doing sociable things with their content, we have people who are thriving. You have conversational artists like Neil Gaiman and Warren Ellis, the MySpaces bands who are selling 1 million units or 500,000 units of their CDs without signing to a label. People who are doing something that looks very much like carrying on a conversation with everyone who is a fan of their work. People whose work is used to convene communities. Now, there are artists who aren't any good at this, and who nevertheless produce good art. In just the same way as there were artists who were very good performers, but whose virtuosity wasn't enough to carry them into the era of the radio. Technology giveth and technology taketh away. There are some people who will succeed and some people who will fail. The interesting thing, an important thing to note about internet-based content delivery and content businesses is that they have a much wider pool of who gets to decide whether they succeed or fail. We used to have patronage, where art succeeded if the Pope liked it. Then we had copyright, where art succeeded if an industrialist would invest in it. What we're moving into is a system where art succeeds if people like it. And I think that that's a democratizing of the gatekeeper. And that's only good for society. That's only good for art. That's only good for culture and expression. There's a great South Park episode called the Magic Underpants Gnome episode. And in the Magic Underpants Gnomes episode, a character in this cartoon show discovers that in the middle of the night, gnomes sneak into his bedroom and steal his underpants and take them away. And he follows the gnomes to their underground lair, and it's a giant cave, and on the wall, above a pile of underpants, is a sign that says, "Plan for world domination. Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, nothing. Step 3, profit." And the rest of the episode is about showing them that there's not a conceivable step 2 that goes from step 1 to step 3. The entertainment industry has hit on a Magic Underpants business model of its own. Step 1, take everyone who used to be a fan and has defected to peer-to-peer and sue them for their life savings. Take everyone who's still a fan and hasn't yet defected and treat them like criminals with digital rights management technology until they leave the fold. Step 2, step 3, a chastened world returns to the mall, credit card in hand, to be your customer again. There is no step 2 that takes you from criminalizing your audience to making a profit off of them again. So that is the last lesson that I'd like to leave you with today, or the last thought I'd like to leave you with today, is that the best thing to know if you want to know whether or not your business model is going to work on the internet is whether or not it's going to treat people like crooks. A couple of years ago, science fiction was in a great state of uproar. Science fiction is a unique literature in many ways, but one of the things that I think makes it most interesting is it's the only literature, apart from O'Reilly technical books, that people bother to pirate in any particular volume on the internet. That gives me a lot of hope. Right? I think I'd be a lot more worried if no one was interested in taking my stuff than if people were interested in taking my stuff. And my first novel was about to come out from Tor Books. And we did a little deal that would allow me to take my novel and release it under a license that had just been launched called the Creative Commons license that allows people to share the book on an unlimited and non-commercial basis. 3 years later, that book is in its 6th printing, and 650,000 copies have been distributed from my website. Because my biggest problem isn't piracy, it's obscurity. Putting books into people's hands is the best advertisement my books can have. And for every copy that's displaced because someone says, well, the electronic one is good enough, I don't have to buy it. I sometimes, very rarely, get emails from people saying, haha, you dumb info hippie, now I don't have to buy your book. Thousands of people discover that having the electronic and the print edition are worth having together. And that not being treated like a criminal, as a number of science fiction writers have started to do. There's one writer who actually sued AOL and under the principle that they should be actively censoring which parts of the internet are available to their customers because some of them might have pirated copies of his books. Not treating your customers like crooks turns out to be good for your business. So that's it. thank you very much. I think we've got about 20 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Cory.
For water?
Yeah, I'll bring you some. We're going to try to go back on schedule, so we have time, 5 minutes for a few questions. Hands rising. There you go.
Hi, Cory.
Hiya.
Tom Purvis. I'm no fan of DRM myself, but we often come back to the economic argument behind DRM and why content creators like it for that reason. What about the moral rights issue in terms of there's the one argument of mashups are good, but then there's the other argument of artists who want to protect their work for the integrity of the work itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, artists can talk a lot about wanting to protect the integrity of work, but and of course, moral rights are enshrined in things like the Berne Convention. But as a practical matter, it doesn't have a lot of nexus with how culture is practiced. Culture always involves taking other stuff that's in your culture and turning it and transforming it in ways that is often antithetical to the intentions of the original author. I think a better way to pose this is to say that culture thrives when there's more of it. Right? It's not a bad metric for whether or not culture is thriving or contracting. And when you take things like mashups, it's a good example because mashups, it's very hard to suggest that mashups displace a copy of the original. People who downloaded the Grey album didn't say that now I've heard DJ Danger Mouse reinterpret the Beatles. I don't need to buy Beatles records anymore. The argument from EMI, and I had this argument with an EMI representative at the European Presidency event, the Creative Economy event in London, is that they should not be allowed to make that record because it displeases them, not because it will reduce the quantity of works in the field. And they said that the story had a happy ending. The EMI representative I was speaking to said the story has a happy ending because even though we attempted to censor this work, to suppress the distribution of this work, we subsequently hired Danger Mouse to produce an album for us. Well, I don't see a big difference between that and the Pope says that you're allowed to make art, so you're allowed to make art. If you want to make mashups, if you want to use samples, chances are, if you're signed to a label, your label's legal department has a well-wrought procedure for taking samples and clearing them with other labels. If you're not signed to one of 4 companies, the same piece of art is essentially impossible to make. So this, to me, isn't either a moral rights question or a market question. This is a censorship question. This is a patronage question.
Yes, hello. Just a few comments. Thanks for the great talk.
Oh, thank you.
I fully agree with the issue centered around the consumer. However, there is a point to make for all the enterprise sector, which is the characteristics and the requirements are very different, although a lot of the technology, basically underlying technology, will be the same. That's one point. And second point is, you mentioned that actually there's this either-or situation, which is basically take or leave. Isn't there something like, Ed Felton that you mentioned came out in a column of ACM last year talking about this copyright balance principle by which basically any DRM system should not prevent legitimate use from, like fair use or to enjoy the traditional rights that we already enjoy. And isn't there a space, you think, for some middle ground gray zone there where you would not treat people as criminals, but also take into account some of the things?
Well, I mean, it would be interesting if someone could make a technology that was capable of preserving all of the uses that we enjoy under the law, all the user rights uses that we enjoy under the law, and also capable of accommodating new uses that might be conceived of in the future, because the way that new copyright law gets made is someone thinks of a new use, it becomes widespread, and then we institutionalize it in law, right? There wasn't a law that legalized using VCRs to home record before there were VCRs. You can't, as a lawmaker, sit down and write out all the things that someone might possibly do with works given any potential technology that might someday be invented in the future. It's necessarily a reactive process. So if you could imagine a DRM system, a technology that could be deployed in the field that wouldn't require it to be designed to resist user modification, so it could be implemented in free and open source software, that could respect the entire class of uses that are allowed under the law, which tend to be very fact-specific. For example, you're allowed to quote in a more liberal way in the instance of parody than in other instances, right? You'd have to find a microchip that was capable of distinguishing between parody and not parody, and something we usually leave to Supreme Court judges. For example, in the Oh Pretty Woman case with Two Live Crew. And then you'd also have to make this technology capable of second-guessing which laws would be made in the future by Congress or by judicial fiat that would enable new uses. So I think that's as a design brief, that's not one that I think many technologists would willingly take on. I certainly wouldn't, and I don't have a lot of confidence in that emerging. But should a technology that meets those characteristics emerge, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Now, interestingly, we actually have a technology that meets all of those characteristics. It's called the law, right? The law is a giant, many moving parts system that we use to take people who've done bad things and prosecute them. But what we don't do in the main is exercise prior restraint, particularly on private deeds. Right? We don't say, although this screwdriver should never be used to fish toast out of your electric toaster, we are going to mandate toaster designs and screwdriver designs in such a way that it never could be used in that way. What we do, though, is we punish people who break the law, and I think that that's a pretty good answer.
One very, very last question. Short, you promise? Okay.
I liked your sentence or your phrase about the democratization of gatekeepers or gatekeeping. Is there any future for gatekeepers? And I'm thinking of journalists here, of which I'm one.
I think that journalists are important, and I don't think that they'll go away. I think that the big question about journalism is really a question about the economics of classified advertising. Where so much journalism, in particular American print journalism, is supported by classified ads. And people who take out classified ads are finding that they get a better return on their classified ad spending on Google, on Craigslist, and on eBay. And as a consequence, classified advertising is draining out of the American newspaper system, which is challenging the newspaper system's ability to go on paying for these vital newsrooms that do investigative journalism. And that's a hard question. It's a hard problem. People certainly value newspapers and newsrooms and will go on consuming what they produce, but what they won't do is they won't buy a $5 copy of the New York Times, right? And if you take all the advertising out of the New York Times, it's probably what it's going to cost. So I think the question that we need to ask is not, this has often been phrased as like, are bloggers journalists? I think the question we need to ask is, given that bloggers seem to have found a business model that produces a lot of blog posts, and believe me, it's a lot of blog posts, how do we turn that business model to something that produces investigative journalism? Because investigative journalism is important, and blogs seem to have figured out a way to get people to write stuff.
Thank you very much, Cory. I'm sure there are loads of other questions. We have a break in 1 hour. Bruce Sterling is up in 2 minutes. Woo! Thank you.
Let's